It's an Archaeodeath Interview with Professor Howard Williams and his guest.
Okay, hello Archaeodeathlings, and welcome to another interview with myself, Howard Williams, and my special guest. And this time we've got Dr Lindsey Büster of the University of York. And Lindsey actually was one of our keynote speakers at the recent student conference, the 6th University of Chester Archaeology student conference called DigiDeath, where in that context she talked all about her public archaeology, her public engagement, or the horrors of public engagement in her case. But welcome, Lindsey, to a proper chat about all things deathly.
Thanks, Howard.
It's great to have you on this brand new sort of emergent, is that the word? Whatever it is, this Archaeodeath interview format, which I'm playing with. And, basically, we have free reign to talk about anything we want about mortuary archaeology and anything you'd want to chat about your research. But I'd hope to take the viewers and listeners on a journey, the story of Lindsey from your earliest archaeology, and then all the exciting projects you've been doing as a PhD and postdoctoral researcher, and then up to date about maybe ask you some questions about what you think about mortuary archaeology and what's going on, in the current field, so that viewers, maybe students, researchers, just randomers on the internet, and hopefully they'll learn a bit about mortuary archaeology from our conversation. But I just want to ask you start off, Lindsey, how did you get into this whole crazy world of archaeology?
Well, I'm not going to lie, I was always a fan of Indiana Jones. No, seriously. I sort of fell into archaeology probably in much the same way as a lot of people do. I didn't study it at school. I didn't know that you could do it at university, and I didn't even know it was a job. But I really liked studying biology and chemistry and geography. Well, maybe towards the end, not chemistry that so much. But I wanted a subject where I could kind of take all of those passions that I enjoyed and really not have to choose and not have to compromise between them. And I think it was my dad probably sort of scrolling through the UCAS list of courses that you could do at university, and it was him that said, "Oh, Linz, how about archaeology? Isn't that just the study of everything in the past?" And we got chatting about it, and I thought, do you know what? And now I would agree that it is, you can study economics, politics, psychology, environment, anything you like really within archaeology. And so that's probably one of the main reasons that I did it at university. I also really liked to travel, and I'm a big fan of the outdoors and nature. So I wanted a job where I could sort of pick and choose what I wanted to study, but also get a bit of fresh air at the same time. And by the end of my final year in my undergrad at UCL, I was completely hooked on the early medieval period. Now, those of you that know how my career has progressed since might be surprised to know that, but I was completely hooked on the early medieval period. And so after my undergraduate, I made the decision to move up to York to do the MA in medieval archaeology. And so it's kind of ironic that I've ended up back here actually after all this time.
Yeah. What went wrong, Lindsey? You had that promising career in early medieval archaeology, which obviously was the right choice,
Yeah.
And then it all went downhill, and prehistoric and primitive and savage, those barbarous Celts and all sorts. That's all I know about things before the Romans. So that's so how did that all happen? Why Iron Age?
That's all that I knew too. After my MA, I decided that I wanted some fieldwork experience, so I went and did a Chartered Institute of Archaeology funded placement with Arcus in Sheffield and learned all about the world of industrial archaeology and fieldwork and commercial archaeology. But after a year in the rain, I decided it was probably time to get back into academia. And really, I was sort of searching around for PhDs and found one on the internet advertised as funded, which is, quite rare. And it was funded at the University of Bradford. And the one of the kind of other draws for me was that there was a 3-month placement included with Historic Environment Scotland. And one of my other passions, I suppose, as well as, history and nature, is Scotland. I used to take a lot of holidays in Scotland as a child. And so that really drew me to it. The problem was that it was on the Iron Age. and I knew absolutely nothing about the Iron Age. It was on Iron Age roundhouses specifically, and that's exactly what I said in interview. I was asked, what do you know about the Iron Age? And I said, absolutely nothing. And lo and behold, I got it. They called me up and said, yeah, you've got the PhD, or the opportunity to study the PhD. When can you start? And I was as surprised as anyone. And I suppose the moral of the story for anyone out there is just go for it. You know, even if you don't think you're qualified, just go for it, because you never know. So that was me starting a PhD at the University of Bradford on Iron Age roundhouses, as part of a Historic Environment Scotland and AHRC funded project called the Brocksmouth Project, which was tasked with writing up the legacy excavations of a hill fort in Scotland that had been conducted in 1978 to 1979 but never written up. And so there was a big project to publish all of these excavations, and 3 PhDs to sort of support that and tease out the kind of academic benefit of this. So as I said, my part of the PhD was Iron Age roundhouses, which I really loved. I'd done some buildings archaeology, some standing buildings archaeology at Arcus in Sheffield, and sort of had a bit of a love for buildings, I suppose. I'd actually been offered a job as a buildings archaeologist back in London when I got the call about the PhD. But I thought, oh, you know, subterranean buildings, it's practically the same as standing buildings. So that's sort of how that avenue of research opened up. And it's kind of funny, actually, because of my love of science at school and sort of being a fan of my own company, I always thought I'd end up being an archaeological scientist, sort of surrounded by inanimate objects that go ping. But sometimes things just don't turn out like that. And I found myself more and more drawn to a sort of anthropological exploration of the ways that people think and rationalise their world. And the Iron Age is a really good place to do this, because there's a lot of things in Iron Age archaeology which don't really make sense to the modern brain and require a little bit of thinking outside the box to explain them, I suppose. So what I got really interested in with the roundhouses was the way that people sort of use everyday rituals and kind of activities to rationalise the world around them. So not just kind of lavish religious or ritual festivals or events, but, you know, the things that take place within people's homes in everyday life, that give you a clue to how they're rationalising the world around them. And certainly I could see lots of evidence for these rituals, as I said, in the roundhouses at Brocksmouth. And that's true across the Iron Age, actually, where for really one of the first times you really see the kind of the ritual and the domestic all come together under one roof, essentially. There's no real separate funerary landscape or ritual landscape in the Iron Age. Everything is focused on settlements and homes and the places where people live. And so it really makes you think quite differently about ritual, about religion, and how people kind of articulate their understandings of the world as they go about their daily lives. And that really got me hooked. And at that point, I wasn't really going to be a straight up archaeological scientist anymore.
See, it's like a wonderful story of someone who's building their skill set, their knowledge, their expertise, but is also adaptable in following opportunities. Is that a fair characterization that I think potential archaeologists might want to think about, you know, when they're thinking about what they do? Because I certainly see a lot of what you say in a lot of other people's routes, but also I see some very careful selections that I haven't seen in necessarily my own a rather random route. But you know what I mean? It's important to keep that, have a vision, but also a flexibility. I don't know if that's fair to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that I was probably always a person that needed a vision and needed, you know, to know exactly what they were doing. And sometimes, I suppose, in my career, as you'll see later in the discussion, it has felt quite chaotic, and I'm sort of jumping from one kind of lily pad to the other. But yeah, I think flexibility is really important. And I think not having the courage to abandon one path and go where the data takes you or where your interests take you, and to understand that your interests develop and they don't necessarily stay the same. I could have had, you know, if there'd been a funded PhD out there in the early medieval period, maybe, you know, I'd be sitting here talking to you about a completely different set of archaeology. But I think, yeah, I think take every opportunity that comes and don't be afraid to sort of waver from what you think your predetermined path is, especially in a career in academia or a career in archaeology. And I think if I could give that advice to my kind of undergraduate self, not to panic quite so much, that would have been good.
Don't panic. Hitchhiker's Guide to Archaeology. So, I mean, what I would like to ask a bit more about the PhD before we move on is about how Broxmouth, as a project that was writing up legacy material, you know, how your PhD fitted into that project, and how, because I worked on a PhD, it was my own PhD, you know, it had parameters, it fitted into the research of my supervisor who saw this as a yawning gap, but it really was its own, I was my own boss. But you were in a very different dynamic there. So were you mainly looking at the Broxmouth roundhouses, or was that just a part of a bigger data set? How did that work?
Yeah, well, yeah, interesting. I think starting out, I was probably going to be looking at the Broxmouth roundhouses as part of a much wider sort of data set. But as the project progressed, mainly one of the reasons for the PhD is that one of the products, as well as my PhD, was to write a chapter. I've got some props with me. Write a chapter in the monograph, which came out in 2013. And I have a chat. So very quickly after my PhD, I got a publication straight off, which was a chapter in this monograph. So that was great. And I think it was a very different kind of PhD to the kind that most people do. And in some ways, I suppose you don't quite have that freedom to go off and, you know, explore every tangential avenue that you want to, because at the end of the day, there's kind of funding deadlines and project deadlines that you need to hit. But I think what was really good about my PhD was I was part of a team, not only the project team, but also 2 other PhD students. And we came to the office every day. Everyone does a PhD differently, but from my point of view, in order to try and keep a little bit of separation between sort of work and home life, which I'm very, very bad at. It's failed spectacularly. But during the PhD, it was a kind of 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, you know, and the other 2 kind of kept me coming into the office. You know, there was kind of unspoken expectation that we'd all be there, kind of squirreling away, okay, drinking coffee and having a lot of chat as well. But being part of a bigger team sort of gave the PhD meaning in some of the moments where sometimes you feel a bit isolated and a bit kind of hopeless about it.
Oh, I'm jealous. You know, it sounds wonderful.
Yeah, so it really instilled like quite a big work ethic in me, I suppose. And of course, the 3-month placement Historic Environment Scotland was fantastic. Not sure I learned loads about the work of Historic Environment Scotland. I learned quite a bit, but actually the networking opportunities, just the opportunity to be up in Scotland, to go to the seminar series, to get to know everyone, to sit in on meetings, to put kind of faces to names, was just invaluable. And really, I credit that with the reason I'm still in academia and I'm still being employed, I suppose, in archaeology. It was such a fantastic opportunity, and it meant that when I came out of my PhD, I at least had a little bit of networking scaffolding, I suppose. You know, I wasn't just kind of being chucked out of PhD into this vacuum. And I'm really grateful for that. And I think certainly from the kind of person that I am, and, you know, need for sort of structure and things like that, it was the best kind of PhD I could have done, even though perhaps, you know, at times I was more of a slave to the project than I was to the PhD and the sort of blue sky thinking ideas that maybe other kinds of PhD promote. Like I said, it's one path, but it definitely.
Because as viewers will be aware, having a PhD itself doesn't guarantee you a career, but if I may augment what you've said by just reiterating the fact that not only have you jumped at this point between 3 different universities and 3 different sets of environment and networks, but you've spent some time in commercial archaeology, and you've worked on a PhD that allows you to have a publication, you know, venue, as well as you say, this time in Scotland. So you have that sort of those different strings to your bow. I hate that phrase, but sorry, you know.
No, it's completely true. And I think as you know, as we go on through the conversation, you'll see I really am just a bit of a jack of all trades, really. But you know, that's in this climate particularly, I think that's probably quite a strength.
Is there anything else you wanted to tell us about the domestic ritual aspects of your PhD that perhaps will feed into later discussions?
Yeah, well, hopefully you'll see that actually, as I've worked on some really, really different and varied projects, and the link between them doesn't always seem very obvious, but actually, even in my own mind, I'm just working on a body of work at the minute, which is really hooking all these things together. That's it for now, really. Just at the Broxworth Roundhouses, I was so lucky to work on that set of structures. They were so well preserved. They're kind of composite timber stone structures, and what characterised them really, and what I spent a lot of my PhD talking about, were these little artefacts that were kind of tucked under the walls and put beneath the floors, really kind of mundane things, these bone spoons, a gaming piece, quern stones for grinding grain, and you know, in a modern context, it seems really odd, you know, that people would. This wasn't rubbish. It wasn't stuff that had been sort of just casually discarded. The roundhouses were kept scrupulously clean, actually, and there's even evidence for floor erosion where they were kind of being swept out all the time. So to find these unusual little artifacts, even a human cranial fragment, actually, in one of the houses, tucked under the walls, it really gets you thinking quite differently about, you know, how people experience the world, and you know, sort of sets you on a path to really understand why they're doing the things that they're doing. And hopefully you'll see that through my various projects, that's never really left me. That's that quest, that search for understanding some of these really intimate and, you know, intimate depositional episodes with what seem like, you know, mundane rubbish items, I suppose.
Careful attention to context, objects that may seem, you know, mundane, but have the context gives a meaning of the way that they're placed. That's fantastic. So I mean, what happened then? Where, you know, because it goes on, this story. You know,
so after the PhD, there was still the small case of a book to copy edit. All the bits of the book were there, but it needed kind of putting together. So I was hired as a research assistant. I was kept on, and people who know me will tell you that I'm quite a sort of crazy attention to detail. Copy editing is kind of, you know, well suited to me. So I was hired to essentially copy edit and put the book together, which again, oh my goodness, it was such a level of responsibility for someone who just comes out of their PhD. And again, a different side of things, like, you know, I was liaising with copy editors and publishers and understanding why it's important to have your images at the right resolution and all kinds of things like that, you know, which seemed a world away from, you know, thinking about spoons under walls in roundhouses. So that was that, and that took me up to the end of 2013. And then very, very fortunately, Ian Armett, who directed the Broxworth project, got more funding from Historic Environment Scotland to do basically the same kind of model, the same kind of project, but for a different set of legacy excavations. These ones were at a site called the Sculptor's Cave, which is on the south coast of the south shore of the Moray Firth in northeast Scotland. And again, I don't know why 1979 keeps cropping up as a really seminal date, but again, excavations in 1979 that unfortunately hadn't been written up because the excavator of the second set of excavations in 1979 died unexpectedly in 2009, and so this set of excavations was left unpublished. So again, same kind of model, this time unfortunately without the funding for PhD students, but me as a postdoc working with Ian to essentially do the same thing, to publish the excavations.
And so you spent all that time working on a cave archaeology as opposed to a sort of a hill fort site. So it's a very different kind of material. Yeah, well, again, talking about different strings to your bow. So I was catapulted from Iron Age roundhouses, thinking very much about the domestic sphere, I suppose. And, you know, I've just talked about how important the domestic was in Iron Age Britain, and that they didn't have separate funerary landscapes. But actually, here I was catapulted to a cave site, so very sort of, I guess, non-domestic, not in a settlement sense anyway, which saw 1,500 years of continuous use from the late Bronze Age. So I was going slightly back in time even further, really, you know, getting very far away from my early medieval roots now.
And that activity went from the late Bronze Age to the Roman Iron Age, which in Scotland is up to about 400 AD. And the reason why the Sculptor's Cave was so famous, even without full publication, is that it's punctuated by 2 episodes of funerary activity, so very distinctly funerary activity, which is very rare in later prehistoric Britain. And the bones are really just a big commingled, disarticulated jumble. The one characteristic which has come up again and again, and actually if you see the DigiDeath talk, really has captured the public and the media's attention, was a decapitation event where we have a series of cut marked kind of neck vertebrae in the cave, and that happened right at the end of the cave's use in the Roman Iron Age. But actually the funerary activity in the cave before that is equally interesting, and I spent a lot of time kind of knee deep in spreadsheets looking at bone elements and bits of bodies, trying to work out what kind of funerary activity we were looking at in the cave.
And it was when you say 2 episodes, we're talking about 2 chronologically utterly disparate episodes, if I recall rightly, is that?
Yeah, so the late Bronze Age episode and the Roman Iron Age episode are separated by about a millennium of use of the cave, where we don't see any bones, but there's lots and lots of activity. So the cooking of food, the preparing of meals, the preparing of food. So there's clearly people coming to the cave and essentially visiting late Bronze Age ancestors. So if I explain a little bit about the late Bronze Age assemblage, from what we can piece together, most of the bones from the first excavation of the cave in the late 1920s by someone called Sylvia Benton, most of those bones have been lost to the sands of time. All we have are bone lists drawn up by the anatomists of the time, which have the element and the side and the rough age of each element. Piecing all this together, we could say that the late Bronze Age population were predominantly children, which is quite unusual in a sort of funerary setting. Yeah. And what seems to have happened is that they were exposed off-site elsewhere after they died. So a little bit like what we might think of, it's called excarnation, and the nearest thing would be kind of Tibetan sky burial, if anyone's heard of that in a modern context. And so bodies being left out to the elements to disarticulate. After a while, when all the little bones of the hands and feet had kind of fallen away, these bodies, these parts of bodies akin to something like mummy bundles maybe, were taken to the cave, adorned in what we think is all kinds of finery. What the Sculptor's Cave is also really famous for are a set of 10 gold-covered hair ornaments, which are really spectacular. And in a Scottish context, the Sculptor's Cave has the most of any Scottish site. And it looks like these mummy bundles, these kind of bodies, these adorned bodies, were displayed or stored on some kind of racking at the entrance. They will eventually have kind of disarticulated and fallen to the ground. But clearly the Iron Age people who were visiting the site in the next 1,000 years or so would have seen evidence of this. And the fact that they're deliberately coming there, I should say the Sculptor's Cave is really, really difficult to get to, like phenomenally difficult to get to. It requires scaling down cliffs and crawling over slippery boulders. So you really
don't just come across it. You have to actively plan a journey there, tides.
Really want to get there.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so they were going there to cook food and to prepare meals. So presumably this has something to do with visiting ancestors, maybe leaving offerings for ancestors, things like that. And then in the Roman Iron Age, basically the opposite process again, I guess, seems to be happening. So again, the cave is used for laying out the dead, but this time bodies seem to be being brought to the cave very soon after death. So when they're still fleshed, when they're still articulated. And it's in the cave that they start to disarticulate and the little bones of the hands and feet kind of drop off. And then at some point after that, people are coming to the cave and they're taking the larger, more recognizable bones, so the long bones from the legs and crania, skulls and mandibles, things like that. They're taking them away, and they're probably taking them away as sort of keepsakes, or what we might think of as keepsakes, I suppose. And they're probably depositing them in kind of ritual ways back on the domestic settlements at sites like Broxmouth. I mentioned the cranial fragment that was deposited under one of the roundhouse walls at Broxmouth. And on most Iron Age sites at this time, you'll find isolated human bones deposited in pits or in highly specific ways. And so we kind of see in the other half of the process here, we have the primary excarnation site where these bones are being taken from. So it's a hugely complicated story. And shameless plug, if you want to read more about it, the book finally came out in September.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Where I go into all of this in a lot of detail. That's published by the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, as is the Broxmouth volume, actually. They produce really, really nice books, and the Sculptor's Cave and its artifacts are so photogenic that it's worth just looking through, even for the pictures.
Wonderful. So you've got two very exciting site-based excavation projects with very different stories, but telling the story over multiple periods, but in the same rough region, but very exciting, and that evocative sort of two stages of would you call it funerary activity? Is that a term that you feel comfortable with, or would you call it mortuary, or would you call it some other word? What do you feel? Is this mortuary archaeology in any sense that you would people really talk about? Yeah,
I would call it. Yeah, I've used both the terms. Probably mortuary archaeology, but funerary archaeology, I would say, as well, is kind of anything that involves a funeral. And okay, maybe it's not a funeral in the way that we might think about it today. Everyone's standing around a grave pit, or But I think you can see from the kinds of activities that are taking place in the cave that there are rituals associated with the deposition of those bodies. So I think funerary would work as well. One term that I avoid when talking about the Sculptor's Cave is burial, because I think that is kind of misleading in terms of the kinds of funerary practice that are happening there. And I think it's really important to make that distinction and to demonstrate and evidence that diversity of practice as well, which we might touch on a little bit later in the conversation. But yeah, so I would avoid using the word burial for the kinds of rites that are happening at Sculptor's Cave, but mortuary archaeology or funerary archaeology I would be comfortable with using.
These terms matter because it's interesting how we have different regional chronological terms that we feel comfortable using, and they're lazy terms, and they always help us to a degree, but they can lead us down routes, can't they? And I always talk with my students in my death and burial third year module about how everybody in funerary archaeology, mortuary archaeology defaults to the furnished burial assemblage as a kind of typical thing, and it's certainly what I have worked with as in terms of my research to a degree, but everything is seen as a sort of departure from that. But actually that's only one of many different options, and burial, even just assuming things have to be interred, is a false premise based on our Western understanding. So these terms, even the term burial, which may seem neutral, it's utterly useless, or at least misleading in your context. That's really interesting.
In the Iron Age, most of the mortuary rites that take place are invisible to us. We don't really know how people were disposed of, let's say, and so burial was a very, very minority rite in this period.
That's fantastic. So you've gained this in the story of Lindsey. We've got these what you characterize as settlement, and then funerary or ritual sites, if you want to use those terms, building on your expertise. But then you've done other things even more recently, even though that book's just come out. You've been on multiple projects since that project on Sculptor's Cave.
Yeah, well, this is the way of postdocing, I think. It's the kind of harsh reality of postdocing is that you're always kind of finishing one project as the next is beginning, and the outputs always slightly come after the funding's finished, and it's just kind of one of those things. You have to be really flexible. And even at the Sculptor's Cave, because of the funding constraints and because of the sheer time it takes to just process and publish legacy excavations like this, I actually ended up going part-time on the Sculptor's Cave project at Bradford for the last couple of years. But that was great because, again, seeing the positives and everything, it allowed me the opportunity to get involved in another project, a really, really different project that was happening at Bradford. at the time, and this was a really interdisciplinary project between archaeology and healthcare. It was directed by Karina Croucher, who's actually a specialist in the funerary archaeology of the Neolithic Near East. So again, this is like, you know, very much outside my comfort zone. And this, again, just kind of hooking all these bits up together. This was a project that really opened my eyes again to a whole different set of interpretations of the archaeological record. Basically, the project, it was called Continuing Bonds, and it was using archaeology to open up discussions around death, dying and bereavement in contemporary society with healthcare practitioners, particularly end-of-life care workers. And the idea was to run a series of workshops in Bradford and Leicester. We had co-Is in Leicester, Christina Fall, who's a professor in end-of-life care. So to take archaeological case study materials to these workshops and use them to explore and discuss diversity of practice and diversity of coping mechanisms, essentially, when dealing with death, dying and bereavement. In the acknowledgement, I think it's well acknowledged now that we're not very good about talking about these kind of difficult, almost taboo topics in contemporary society, at least in kind of modern Western society. And sometimes this is more detrimental than it is helpful, because sometimes these conversations need having to make sure that everybody gets as good a death, I suppose, and as positive bereavement experience as possible. And interview, again, I should stop being so honest in interviews. You know, I said in an interview I knew nothing about the Iron Age. In this interview, I was asked, you know, what do you think this project what impact will this project have on your archaeology, the way that you interpret the archaeological record? And I told myself, well, it won't, because this is archaeology being used to help the present. It's not about present projecting back onto the past. And certainly I'd always been taught as an undergraduate that kind of projecting our 21st century Western views onto the past is actually quite a dangerous thing to do, and that we need to be really aware of that, and we do. Yeah. But it was a really successful project. I was involved in basically putting together all the archaeological case study materials. I had completely free reign, and I wandered far and wide, completely across time and space. I even included ethnographic examples, so examples basically from diverse cultures across the world today, just to demonstrate to people that it's not an us and them, it's not a past and present thing, that actually what we think of as being completely normal in modern Western society is still just one cultural interpretation or one cultural mechanism by which we deal with death, dying and bereavement, and it's not universal. It wasn't in the past and it isn't today. That was really successful. The workshops definitely took me outside my comfort zone. We also ran outreach events with members of the public, death festivals for children. I ran some death cafes, which are basically just opportunities for people to come together, eat cake, drink tea. Sometimes the cake is death themed, so people have quite.
I was going to ask about that, because that's the main reason I called you to interview, was to hear about cake. But you know, it's all themed, isn't it? It's all themed.
Yeah, it is, and it's about, you know, it's not about being kind of flippant about things, but it's about embracing humour and embracing the kind of positive aspects. And so it's about drinking tea, eating death themed cake. My cake was always bought because I'm really rubbish baker, but and basically just a safe space for people to come and chat and explore topics of death, dying and bereavement. It's not it's not a counselling session, and people are directed to sources of support afterwards if they feel they need it. I'm certainly not a specialist in this, I'm just an archaeologist, but and it doesn't have to be for people who are bereaved at the time or anything like that. It's just a safe space for people to come and talk. Really, really positive feedback. Again, a shameless plug, but if anyone's interested in the kind of results from the project, a sort of big qualitative paper was published in PLOS ONE in December, outlining some of the results from that. That was great. But it had huge impact actually on how I think about the past, and really is making a lot of things that I've encountered in my past projects make sense.
So that's really interesting that you've you almost like you've given us indirectly, you've confessed the way to succeed in archaeology is to just express utter ignorance of the project you're going to be working on. No, but it's a healthy thing, though, isn't it?
They're never going to hire me as a career person, are they?
No. Because seriously, though, I'm joking. But there are so many project proposals I see that claim success and results before they've even begun. I think it's so refreshing and honest to see people aren't going to buy that BS all the time. And they actually want scholars who have an open mind, a critical eye, but do not have preconceived ideas. And, but also the other thing I get from this is that you cannot predict exactly the implications of a project. Okay, right, it's an excavation legacy project. The task is to write it up. Succeeded, job done. Sculptor's Cave, job done. And the same with this project. But also there are things that come out of this you learn and take forward and that you don't expect. So I think that's really, really fascinating. And I know I edited one of the early papers on this, didn't I? In the online journal.
Through the project, yeah.
And I think that this is going to be a really important resource for taking the conversation of what archaeology does for us, in the present, but also how it changes the way we look at the data. So I think that's really, really interesting. I haven't caught up with Plus One. So much has gone on since January. It seems like a million years ago, but I do look forward to, and I think it's going to change the way I teach as well by using that with my students as an example of how we can work in ways that you might not otherwise expect, with communities. I think that's really interesting. I'm sorry, it wasn't a question. I was just sort of enthusing about it all.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, there were challenges about working in an interdisciplinary manner. The language that you use, you were talking about mortuary archaeology and funerary archaeology. Gosh, I can't think of any specifics now, but we came across so many kind of language where we were talking cross purposes and things like that, and just ways of analysing data and everything like that. But no, it was great. I mean, and I'm a big believer of, what you were saying about going in with an open mind. I've always, I don't know if this is just how I work, but I've always just followed the data. I've always just let the data kind of lead me where it's going to go. And I suppose that's why, theoretically, I kind of skip around frameworks, just depending where the data leads me. And the messier the better. If I'm kind of challenged or surprised by the data, I think that's the best thing as an archaeologist. It'd be really boring if you knew all the answers all the time. So I love it when I'm kind of challenged and my preconceptions are challenged.
I mean, obviously you're working with many other scholars on that. Can I press you on how much of your actual, not necessarily the sites you worked on, but the period, your Iron Age, and early medieval, but particularly Iron Age interest, informed that continuing bronze project, or was it really trying to be global, trying to be outside of any particular region or period?
I was trying to be global, but Sculptor's Cave made it in, and a lot of Iron Age examples actually crept in. I suppose because I knew them better, but I think my main the reason why certain case studies made it in was I wanted to challenge. I was a bit naughty, but I wanted to challenge people's preconceptions, and I think the Iron Age is really good for doing that because you get bits of people buried under floors, and of course automatically someone's oh my god, there's been a murder, or whatever. But and so I did use the weirdness of the Iron Age, I think, quite usefully in the project to challenge preconceptions, because I think sometimes unless we're exposed to the diversity of practices, then we don't know what our assumptions are. We don't realize what our preconceptions and our assumptions are. And one of the aims of the project was to kind of educate healthcare professionals to have discussions with dying patients and their families without bringing subconscious baggage, cultural baggage, individual baggage to the conversation. And I found it really interesting to kind of these kind of light bulb moments, threshold concepts it's called, I think, in healthcare, where you gain a level of understanding that, and you can't then go back to where you were before. Your whole understanding of things has changed, and that was really rewarding, I think, to see that. So yes, I think the Iron Age played a huge role in cases that I chose, even if sometimes I strayed from the Iron Age. But I always tried to choose case studies that would challenge people.
Did you find it was this is a question that applies to my work as well, and therefore I'm very interested in your response to this. I don't have a there's no right answer, of course. It's how do you balance this dance we have to play between, you want to emphasize this otherness, this difference of the past, not just the difference between past and present, but difference between people, but also show that shared commonality of mortality. We want it to be the pagan Celts with their crazy rituals and their druids, and I know that I'm joking. That's not for viewers. That's not the way it was. But but equally, we want to say, hey, these people were like us. They had the same challenges, the same, the same unexpected occurrences of death itself, and then how to deal with it. So, I mean, I don't know. Is that a fair way of?
Yeah.
Is that a challenge, or is that okay for you? Did you find that easy?
No, it's a challenge, and I'm very aware of kind of, like you said, it's a really careful balance. What I wanted to do is I wanted to challenge, but I didn't want to shock, and I didn't want to. The othering that I was doing was really to actually. Then I wanted to bring in an element that that created that bond, that continuity between past and present emotions. So what I tended to do actually was show an image first, which maybe was shocking, a bone ossuary, or the site of the sculptor's cave, where I talk about 1700 disarticulated bone fragments, and you have children, and automatically you can see the kind of Daily Mail headlines now. In fact, if people look at my DigiDeath talk, it's not that far from the truth. But then what I did is I encouraged people, once they'd seen the image and they formed an interpretation in their minds, then they were encouraged to turn over the kind of laminates that we were using, and I would tell a story, or I was a bit of contextualizing text on the back to say, actually, these children were lovingly carried and wrapped and adorned and displayed, and people came and cooked for them. And suddenly that's where the change happens. People realized that the assumption that they'd made based on partial information, based on the image, was actually an incorrect, or just a kind of one-sided opinion. And so I always qualified a bit of a shock tactic, or a challenging image, with text to contextualize exactly what was happening, and normally to challenge the preconceptions that people had.
Fantastic. And obviously that project has wrapped up, not fully buried, but wrapped up and being cared for. But I mean, what happened next for you?
Well, I mean, I suppose I'll talk a little bit before I get onto what I'm doing currently, just about to finish off where, I mentioned that actually this project has huge implications on my understanding and my interpretation of the archaeological record. And one of the publications that I've got in press at the minute really sort of ties together. It really does. My work at Brocksmouth, my work on the Sculptor's Cave, and my work on the Continuing Bonds project. And it really stemmed from a quote that one of the participants, or a story that one of the participants told in a workshop, and it stuck with me, and everyone thought it was completely crazy at the time. I was completely fixated on this story, but it was a jar of Horlicks that had been given. I hope that's not product placement there, but a jar of malted drink that a father had given to a daughter, the participant being the daughter, on a random typical shopping trip to the supermarket. It was buy one get one free. They bought them a jar of Horlicks as one of the free things, and given it to them. And then a week later, very unexpectedly, the father had died, and the participant didn't like Horlicks, wasn't going to drink it, and yet it stayed in her cupboard for 5 years until it went solid, because overnight this one artifact had suddenly become so problematic, this kind of mundane thing, that she couldn't possibly throw it out in the rubbish. She couldn't put it in the wheelie bin and just chuck it out. And it got me thinking, and that was just one of many, many stories like that came up during the workshops. And it got me thinking about, it took me right back to the beginning, right back to my work at Brocksmouth, and got me thinking about the little spoons that were tucked under the walls in Brocksmouth roundhouses, and the gaming piece that was deposited in the pit in the Brocksmouth roundhouses. And I thought, I wonder if the spoons are the jar of Horlicks of the Iron Age. And I wonder if what we're seeing here, rather than invoking ritual with a capital R, that it's to do with some deity placating some god or some kind of otherworldly spirit, maybe these are really raw, emotional episodes that we're seeing here in the archaeological record. And because we were always taught as archaeologists not to back project our emotions onto the archaeological record, and you know that you can't find emotion in the past, and it's wrong for us to try and put our psyche into the minds of Iron Age people, which I agree with to a point. But I think in specific, I learned that in specific moments or specific circumstances you can do that. I think death and mortality and bereavement and grief is so universal that although the Continuing Bonds project was all about demonstrating diversity of practice in coping with that, I think the emotions that underlie that diversity are pretty much the same across space and time. And so it got me thinking, and then thinking about the sculptor's cave and how rare it is that we find bodies in the Iron Age, that most of the funerary rites that seem to take place during this time don't have graves or don't have bodies. Obviously, when we found them, they're adorned in all their finery and things like that. But I thought, well, where do you put this problematic stuff if your funerary rite does not involve digging a grave? Presumably, an appropriate place to put a lot of these items in the past was in the grave, in the coffin with the body. I know now with kind of crematoria, and there's so many rules on what you can and can't put in coffins that will explode, and people are always trying to sneak things in, bars of chocolate, things like that. I wonder if that was kind of similar in the Iron Age. What do you do then with all this stuff if you have a funerary rite that doesn't allow you to deposit it with the body, essentially? Presumably you can't throw it out with the rubbish because it's too problematic. So presumably you deposit it in a kind of a very significant and personal way, presumably, you know, surrounded by the family. So you might call it a kind of domestic ritual, and you tuck it under the wall of your roundhouse, or you bury it in a pit under the floor, and you know it's there, but it's kind of dealt with in an appropriate way. And so in a weird full circle thing, the three projects really just came together, and it got me, you know, and now I see what I'm calling problematic stuff all over the place in the archaeological record, everywhere. It's everywhere.
And so you've got a paper coming out that's going to sort of reflect on case studies from across those three projects, or more back to the Brocksmith?
Yeah, it's kind of tacking between the Continuing Bonds project and the Brocksmith project, really.
Okay.
Sculptors is just kind of demonstrating it. I guess Sculptors is actually the exception to the rule, that we actually find the bodies, but it demonstrates that, you know, there is, even when we can find the bodies, there's no grave pit, there's nothing, you know, there's nowhere to put all of this stuff. So it hacks between the kind of the Horlicks and the weird and wonderful things we find, not just at Brocksmith, but Iron Age settlement sites more generally. What archaeologists have generally kind of termed structured deposits under this kind of capsule term, and really having a think about what we call structured deposits, what people term hoards, and what people call grave goods, and can we really separate those, and actually aren't they just all the same thing, just deposited in slightly different ways?
So that's a long story, Lindsey, of all your different projects and research. What are you up to now?
Okay, so yeah, that was a very long and sinuous story, which brings us up to the present, where I, as I mentioned, am back at York, but this time still doing the Iron Age. I haven't come back to York to do the early medieval period, unfortunately, and I'm still postdocing, so clearly I must be doing something right. So now I'm the funerary lead, the funerary postdoc on a really big and really exciting ERC-funded project called Comios. I don't know if you can see it here.
Yes, an acronym. We all like acronyms.
Yeah. I did everyone mugs for Christmas.
Very good.
That's the great thing about a logo. You can put it on everything. And Comios stands for, do you know what? It's such a long title. I'm going to read them.
You can't even remember it.
Communities and Connectivities, Iron Age Britons and their continental neighbours. ERC and other funding bodies love an acronym, and Comios is quite a fitting acronym for this project, because basically this project is looking at it's a bioarchaeology basically of Iron Age communities across Britain and the near continent, And Komios is actually a named Iron Age individual. He turns up in Caesar's Gallic Wars, and he turns up as the chief or the king of the Atrebates tribe in Gaul and in Britain. So Gaul is modern day France, and then he turns up in Britain. He's a bit of a turncoat, actually. I think he sort of changes his mind, and his allegiance is halfway through, and Caesar gets really annoyed with him. But he's very emblematic, I suppose, of what we're trying to hint at with this project, that actually there was probably quite a lot more mobility, both kind of short distance but also long distance, in prehistory than we've kind of previously acknowledged. And the project, it's really building on the kind of the sort of ADNA revolution that's happened recently, but that has focused primarily on really, really large scale migrations. And what we wanted to do with this project is continue to look at the large scale using ADNA, but also to meld that with multi-proxy approaches, such as stable isotope analysis, so sulfur and oxygen, which again looks at mobility, osteology, AMS dating, and funerary archaeology, and that's where I come in, the kind of cultural side of things, and really putting all of that into a theoretical framework. I think one of the criticisms of ADNA research of late is that it's kind of stood alone from kind of theoretical models of archaeology, and what this project is attempting to do. Again, it's directed by Professor Ian Armitt, who's now here at York, and the co-directors are David Reich of the Harvard Lab, who've been instrumental in a lot of these kind of DNA analyses. Professor Jane Evans at the British Geological Institute, British Geological Survey, and Derek Hamilton, who's kind of an AMS dating wizard up at CERC at the University of Glasgow. And there's 4 postdocs on the project. Me, I'm doing the kind of funerary, mortuary, cultural, theoretical framework stuff. There's Maddie Bleasdale, who's doing isotopes. There's Charlie Primo, who's doing the osteology, and Claire Elise Fisher, who's working on the ADNA. And what we hope to do with this project is really look at Iron Age populations, predominantly in Britain, but also in the near continent, at a number of scales. So the really large scale kind of migrations or mobility, however you want to call it. Then looking kind of medium scale at the regional population dynamics, down to kind of site-based community level dynamics, where we have cemeteries or kind of human remains in other depositions. And then looking at individual osteobiographies or migrational histories to really understand the kind of experiences of individuals in the Iron Age. And we hope by doing that, we will kind of alleviate or mitigate against some of the bad press, I suppose, that the ADNA has had of late, and really show the power of using these multi-proxy approaches. I'm a massive believer that ADNA is just one other strand of evidence for us to use. It's not the silver bullet at all. And actually what we've been finding is it makes our data sets much messier. Everything's complicated, nothing fits neatly. And again, as I said before, that's great. That's exactly what I want as an archaeologist. The messier, the more complicated, the better, because that's where we start challenging our preconceptions and, really striving to understand better, and the past was complicated, the present is complicated, and we shouldn't expect the past to be any different.
Well, it sounds like an exciting project. How far long is that again? Sorry, that's
So yes, good point. It started in, let me think, as coronavirus is sort of...
I know, time is gone timey-wimey.
It started in October 2019.
Okay.
I started in January 2020, and I had 6 weeks of getting to know my colleagues before lockdown hit, and we've all been in lockdown ever since. So, the team has bonded, but we've done most of our socialising on Zoom, which is a bit sad. And of course, it has put us back a little bit. So the project, yes, is running basically from 2020 to 2024. It's a 5-year project, and it has put us back a little bit. COVID with the lab restrictions and things like that, but actually the ADNA work at Harvard has kind of been pressing ahead, which has been great. So we have I can't talk about the specifics too much because we have a paper in revision at the minute, but really large ADNA data set, mainly again focusing up at that kind of large scale, but really giving us super interesting insights into not only kind of population mobility at the large scale, but community and site-specific kinship patterns. And yeah, that's the stuff. When we start getting down to the smaller scale, that's the stuff I'm really interested in.
Really cool. That's really exciting. Well, there's going to be lots of you and this project in coming years, in terms of publications coming out, and I look forward to hearing more about it. And I've tried to organise this interview so we hear a journey of you as a researcher, as well as some bloody cool individual projects and the connections between them, even though they're very different types of material. But also, I want to ask. I mean, I spent most of my time in teaching heavy academic jobs rather than I went straight from a PhD. Actually, I didn't finish my PhD until after I got a teaching job, and so that's one of the major differences between us, I think. And I want to. I know that teaching hasn't been your main thing, but I wanted to get a sense of what you've been teaching and how you've been teaching death and mortuary archaeology in particular, or issues of ritual mundane crossover. I mean, can you share with us any of your sort of sense of the academic teaching you've been doing?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough between finishing funding for the Sculptors Cave project and the Continuing Bonds project, I was lucky enough to be offered a teaching fellowship up in Edinburgh, which I did my placement at such a long time ago. So that was wonderful. And so I taught there. I was a teaching fellow in European Iron Age archaeology for about 15 months. And I taught everything from conflict archaeology, or I sort of oversaw the conflict archaeology module. So that sort of comes into the mortuary funerary sphere. We could talk about is it, isn't it? Mortuary, is it, isn't it? Funerary. I taught theory, and I taught some kind of Iron Age specific modules. I suppose my attitude to teaching is very much the same as some of the things that I discussed when I was talking about, using archaeology with those healthcare professionals to open up discussion. That, what I want to show is diversity in practice. What I want to do is challenge preconceptions. What I don't want to do is shock. That's not helpful, I don't think, and I think the othering is dangerous, particularly if we think about society today. What we need to do is embrace diversity, not be shocked by it. And so I suppose my main the sort of satisfaction I get from teaching, I suppose, is when students are challenged. They have that kind of threshold change, in their brains, and suddenly they see the world in a different way, and they begin to embrace diversity and basically challenge everything, challenge all preconceptions, challenge everything that they think or that they thought. Another aspect, this is not to do with mortuary archaeology at all, but another aspect of the teaching that I found quite rewarding, which I didn't realise that I would, was the kind of pastoral side of things. Because as you've probably heard over the last hour or so, my own path through my career so far in academia was definitely not linear, quite dendritic. At times I didn't know always where the next job was coming from. As an undergraduate, I would have freaked out about that. That would have really upset me, and that would have made me very nervous. But hopefully I can demonstrate that if you just take all the opportunities that are given to you, if you enjoy what you're doing and you try and do the best of your ability, then the opportunities kind of come to you, or you find a way. And what was really nice is, that I'm able to pass on now. I'm able to see in the undergraduates, the anxieties that I also had as an undergraduate and as an early career researcher, and not to dismiss them, but be able to understand, where they're coming from, and hopefully to offer some kind of support and advice. So that was a rewarding bit about teaching that I again hadn't thought about. Thank goodness they didn't ask me about that in the interview. Could have said something terrible.
I don't know anything about, given the parallel with previous ones, you probably said, I don't like teaching at all, and then you'd have got the job. No, I'm joking. No, I mean, there's so many of these individual projects we could talk about as interviews in ourselves. But I think we should probably I just want to wrap up there, really, because we're going to obviously put the beauty of this YouTube channel is I can put all the descriptions and links to whatever you would like of all your publications in the comments below, so people can follow these up and explore them in their own time. And we want this to be an entry point into these other exciting projects. And obviously I'll put in your link to your staff profile, so people can follow up your research there. But, it's been a real privilege, Lindsey, talking to such an accomplished and versatile archaeologist, and someone who I think is a great role model, but also that we're going to see a lot more coming of your work on this current project with its acronym that I've immediately forgotten, I must admit, but it's on a mug, so I need a mug for it. There you are. Okay, and also I think of many things moving forward. So it's going to be watch this space for you and your work is all I can say. And thank you so much for giving your time to this interview.
Thanks for inviting me to contribute, Howard. And yeah, check back in 5 or 10 years' time, and who knows what I'll be doing. Maybe I've got back to the early medieval period.
It has to happen. We all go back to the early Middle Ages in some point, in my opinion. That's why we've got the dig in the background. Because as I've ranted in other videos, the Netflix film for me links into this conversation. That's why I picked it, because regardless of people complaining about the representation of fictional representation of a very exciting and famous excavation, for me it was that mortality link that I thought was such an interesting moment for linking into the kind of work of different periods and places that we've been doing about continuing bonds. So regardless of all else, or what people feel about that one film, and the story and how it's accurate, and I thought this is of the moment. This is our time, you see, Lindsey, for mortuary archaeology of a new kind. This bonding type of connection of past, present, living, dead. Oh, it's all good stuff. And
I agree. I think that is the one aspect they did really successfully, actually.
Yeah, it was good. Very interesting. I mean, it's not about proving or not. It's about this relates to where we are at in the 21st century, I think, and the kind of research we're doing. So I hope both of us can continue to do this stuff moving forward. So thank you very much, Lindsey.
Thanks, Howard.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Howard Williams on YouTube. In addition, consider following the Archaeodeath WordPress blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.